Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. We got to talk a little bit about Trump's Mount Rushmore speech. Have you seen it yet? I did not watch it. I only watched like 30 seconds of it, but I read it, of course. I like to read these speeches more. You get very different experiences, pros and cons to each, but it's worth a read, that's for sure. Let's start real quick with the media gaslighting of it all, which is pretty wild. All the media outlets call it dark and disturbing. Dark and disturbing, over and over. Every headline's about how it's so dark and so disturbing. And I thought, oh man, we've heard that before. These are headlines from the last time one of Trump's speeches was dark and disturbing. Do you remember when it was? There were two. It was the convention speech, it was the Republican convention speech, and then his inaugural address. Those were the two last times that whatever Trump said was dark and disturbing. So we have this picture here. So Washington Post, in acceptance speech, Trump's America is a dark and desperate place. CBS News, Donald Trump offers dark vision of America in GOP convention address. You scroll all the way down, not to be outdone, you have the New Yorker, Donald Trump's dark convention. It was double dark, twice as dark as all the other news outlets were calling his convention. It was dark. And the same thing with this, right? That's their go-to always. And if you read the speech, like, I guess you could disagree with him, obviously, but there's no way you could call it dark. But this is a perfect example of what we talked about on yesterday's show from Jonathan Haidt. What we believe drives what we perceive. It's backwards than I think most people think it is. Let me back it up a second. So back during the 2016 election, we were not here together on the TV, but on my radio show, I made the argument over and over, and it's still true, that we make up our minds instantly, split second, you make up your mind, in this case, who you're gonna vote for, but we do it with everything. But you split second, make up your mind, and then the rest is just a very long and expensive process of rationalization. I think it's true with everything, not just voting, like where you wanna get takeout from tonight. Your brain's already made a decision. You know what you want, but you got to go through this long, painful process of rationalizing it and weighing all the options, and you bring in new options to make yourself feel better, but you know you're going to In-N-Out Burger, or that's California, whatever your local favorite burger joint is, you know, but you got to make yourself feel better for at least considering getting a salad from Luna Grilled or whatever, but you already made up your mind. The rest is just this long process of rationalization. I think it's the same with election. Everyone knows who you're going to vote for, but we're just rationalizing it now in a very long and expensive way. So same thing here. We think that we objectively perceive reality, right? We objectively perceive reality, and then dispassionately make up our minds on what we believe to be true and right. No, that's not it. It's the other way around. We make up our minds on what we believe already, and then that changes what we perceive. What we believe drives what we perceive. So if you believe that Trump is dark and dangerous for America, no matter what he says, his speech will be dark and divisive. If you're Senator Duckworth from Illinois, who I've never heard anything from in my entire life, but apparently she's in the running to be Biden's VP maybe, you can't. As I don't know anything about her, but Biden Duckworth? I don't think you can be vice president with the last name Duckworth. Can you? But anyway, she said of his speech, she said, we should be talking about the things that really matter, like Russia and whatever. But instead, he spent all of his time talking about dead traitors. So first I'm thinking, like, who would that even be? Who's a dead traitor? But here's a list of the people that Trump did mention in his speech. This is an exhaustive list. These are all the people that Trump mentioned in his speech. Do you see any dead traitors on this list? Maybe George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. I guess they're traitors to England, if you really want to stretch it here. But I don't know how the Tuskegee Airmen or Clara Barton, she founded the Red Cross, Mark Twain, Frank Sinatra, what dead traitors. Like, what planet are you living on where you see these names and you think, wow. Okay, bringing up the Wright brothers, I see. Wow, pretty divisive, pretty dark. The only way you can come to that conclusion is if you've already decided that that's what you want to hear. So how do you deal with someone like this? You don't. You don't. In your normal day-to-day life, you must just simply ignore people like this. You cannot cast your pearls to swine. Don't engage, because they refuse to hear it. It's a waste of time. Their hearts have been hardened. It can't possibly be worth your time to engage with people like that. That's on a personal day-to-day level. It's a little more difficult when these people are in charge of our nation's media outlets and also every other single pop culture outlet that exists, and now even professional sports. Professional sports used to be the last bastion of at least neutrality, because the foundation principle of a sport is meritocracy, right? But even that's being eroded in our professional sports. So you saw the NFL, I think they're considering, I don't know if they did this, or they're considering having like some affirmative action deal where if you hire a black coach or some black executive for a certain number of years, then you get a higher draft pick the next year or whatever. So they're already kind of eroding the meritocracy feature of sports, and that's the last bastion of it. But now all of our professional sports have been taken over. You know, the NBA, they're thinking about putting Black Lives Matter on the side of the court. You can put different names on the back of your jersey. You can put Black Lives Matter. You can write, say their names, I can't breathe. Ally, you can put ally on the back of your jersey if you're black or if you're white. Anti-racist. For some reason, there's a list of approved words that you can write. You can't write free Hong Kong, obviously. China won't allow that. But you can also put group economics. I don't even know what that means. I don't know why. I don't know what it means. I don't know why you could put that on the back of your jersey, or why you'd want to put that on the back of your group economics, unless that's maybe the term for, communism. That's the new nice sounding word for communism. And now, the NFL is playing the black national anthem before week 1 games, whatever the heck that is. Helmets are now, they're thinking about going to put victims of police brutality on the side of their helmets. No victims of, the children that were killed in Chicago this last weekend. They're not going to be in the helmets, certainly not. My point is, you're hearing divisive messaging from every single angle and every single aspect of pop culture. Unity is not allowed, which is actually what Trump's speech was really about. My other favorite thing the media is doing here, other than calling it dark and divisive, is they do this like weird thing where they pretend like this is out of nowhere. Like Trump says the left wants to tear down statues and change our history and erode our founding principles, and the left is like, what is he talking about? Like this is all just a figment of his imagination. Trump's the one picking this fight. We got a media supercut here from just the last few days talking about Mount Rushmore of all places. Here.
Donald Trump chose the most grandiose symbol of U.S. imperialism on Earth to usher in a very on-brand, star-spangled spectacle.
The mother of all photo ops, Mount Rushmore. And we know why this president just can't resist going there.
President Trump will be at Mount Rushmore, where he'll be standing in front of a monument of 2 slave owners and on land wrestled away from Native Americans.
We have to acknowledge that Mount Rushmore is sitting on Lakota land.
The place Donald Trump is going to on Friday is stolen land.
He will inevitably and predictably talk about our heritage. In other words, he will talk about he is the protector of white America.
And to indigenous people, Mount Rushmore, with 4 white presidents, 2 of whom were slave owners, is one of those symbols.
Questions have really been raised about Thomas Jefferson in particular, but also George Washington for their holdings of slaves.
It's worth reminding folks that the man who carved the monument behind me had deep ties to the KKK.
There are other issues. The sculptor, Gutzon Borglum, was a supporter of the Ku Klux Klan. That, of course, is something in all the history books.
Mount Rushmore isn't exactly the innocent ode to our founding fathers as described in our textbooks, and it's high time we disrupt that false narrative that far too many people believe.
Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore. We're going after Mount Rushmore. What are you talking about? By the way, Trump's going to make this a central point of his campaign, Mount Rushmore, because I even think that's even a bridge. Like most people will be like, tear down the Christopher Columbus statue, whatever. But I don't think people want to tear down Mount Rushmore. And you can't tear it down. You have to blow it up. So it's like it's a stronghold for Trump to stand behind because you can't like pull it down like you can at Christopher Columbus statue. So I think you're going to see a lot more Mount Rushmore coming from Trump, which makes sense because it's a grandiose symbol of the most grandiose symbol of U.S. imperialism on earth. What are you talking? I love Chris Cuomo too. He's like, and he can't resist going there. Like, yeah, because that's where all the white supremacists go, like Bernie Sanders in 2016.
This is our country at its very best. What an incredible achievement.
Visiting Mount Rushmore today, Bernie Sanders taking in the majesty of the moment. This monument to 4 great American presidents.
Just the accomplishment and the beauty here. It really does make one very proud to be an American.
Sanders has his own mountain to climb.
We stopped there 4 years ago. Oh, it's beautiful. Wow, man, it makes me proud to be an American. That was 4 years ago, and now it's the most grandiose sign of U.S. imperialism. This, speaking of Tammy Duckworth, this is Tammy Duckworth. Do we have the picture, guys, of her? So this is 4th of July, 2015, so just 5 years ago. She said, we're all dressed, this is on Twitter, she put, we're all dressed up as historical figures. I just covered myself in stars and stripes. Next year, I'm going as Mount Rushmore. And there's a picture out there, too, of her just dressed up in patriotic gear. Next, she has 5 years ago, I'm going as Mount, hold on. And now here you are saying that it's like super racist and all the white supremacists. That was just 4 or 5 years ago. If it seems like things are moving fast, they are. It's impossible to keep up. It's impossible to be woke enough. And of course, as we were saying before, it's impossible to be forgiven or to get redemption. Do not play games that you can't win. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. This is becoming more and more obvious, but more important than that, more and more sad. But it needs to get even more attention. I mean, Matt Walsh, among others, but Matt Walsh made the point that police shot 9 unarmed black people all of last year, and 25 people were shot in Atlanta yesterday. This would have been 2 days ago, right? But yeah, 2 days ago. And not by police. But Black Lives Matter says that first thing's a crisis worthy of rioting, but the second is not. And you've heard by now an 8-year-old shot and killed in Atlanta. My understanding is it was about 10 p.m. at night. It was the car with the 8-year-old, her mom, and some adult friend, and they were pulling into a parking lot, and a group of people stopped them and fired into the car, killed the 8-year-old. 20 people have been killed in George Floyd riots so far. I haven't seen pictures of all of them, but almost all I think all the pictures I've seen are of black people. Big picture is 6 weeks, 6 cities alone, 600 murders. In just 6 cities, over 600 murders. The mayor of Chicago, after a 7-year-old girl was killed. So this 7-year-old girl was at a 4th of July party at her grandmother's house. Car pulled up, 3 men got out and started shooting randomly. She was shot in the head, 7 years old. And the mayor said, we're making progress in slowing shootings, but we have to do better, every single one of us. Like, what are you talking, progress? In Chicago, 4th of July weekend, 13 people were killed, 54 wounded, 9 minors shot, 2 of those killed. What are you... There's a million different angles we can go, but let me just make this point. I wonder how many of the murderers have dads. I think it's a safe bet to say none, actually, but 10%, maybe 10%. Have you seen this video going around? This is a video of a dad and his son. I don't know how old his son here is, maybe 10 years old, maybe. They're boxing in the backyard, and his dad's helping him out here. Check this out.
Zeus, step back. No, we're working on coordination. That's why it's hard. Let's go. What you crying for? Talk to me.
I don't feel good, babe.
Why not? Look at me, son. Why not?
Because I keep having to do it over again.
Over and over again doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means you have to practice, son. You haven't done this before. Remember what I said about Einstein? He's on record as being one of the smartest men ever to exist. He says it's not that I'm smarter than anyone, it's just that I stick with problems longer. You understand? All right, get your hands up. Take your time, slow your thoughts down, all right? One target at a time. Zeus. Step back. One. There you go. Zeus. Step back. Go. Zeus.
Cool, right? For that boy to be able to say, I don't feel confident in myself, to be able to articulate that at that age, that's so awesome. But here's the deal. That boy who doesn't have confidence in himself, if he didn't have a dad there to help talk him through it, at that moment, he would have found confidence, he would have been searching for confidence in all the wrong places. Right? He would have gone looking for it somewhere. He would have tried to excel in something, in a gang, or wherever. That's the power of dads right there. Dennis Prager wrote a great piece about this movement, right? Critical race theory, Black Lives Matter. And his argument is that this movement has set black people in America back 50 years. And he listed a couple of reasons that I want to talk about here. The first is defunding the police, right? Who's that helping? This is our friend, Professor Wilfred Riley. He said, do I have it here? Yeah. He said the near refusal of Black Lives Matter to discuss black on black crime is one of the weirdest disconnects in politics. Whenever I ask young black men who I mentor and speak to, their biggest worry is not Confederate statues or trans rights or even the cop on the beat, but brothers killing brothers. And when we went over last week the numbers of shootings and robberies and felonies, I think we did Atlanta in the first 3 weeks of June this year compared to last year's, the first 3 weeks in June. And the numbers have skyrocketed, tripled in some cases. And it's because the police know that the city leaders don't have their backs. So who are the victims of these crimes? Who are the victims of these 3 times as many murders? Who are the victims of these like 4x more felonies than in years past? Black people. So is defunding the police and fewer police helping black people? Of course not. Here's the second thing from Prager. He said, take the left-wing mantra that all whites are racists. If I wanted to obstruct black progress, if I wanted to, and especially damage black children, I couldn't come up with a more effective idea. To believe from early childhood that you walk through life held in contempt by all of your fellow citizens who are white is to walk through life with more than a chip on your shoulder, it's more like a heavy boulder. It means that you will walk through life with 2 paralyzing burdens, anger and victimhood. Either one is going to ruin your life. Combined, they're devastating. It gives one an idea of how cynical the left is that it would want to cultivate both of these life-ruining emotions in as many black people as possible. Anger and victimhood. I watched a video of the Columbia linguist Professor John McWhorton the other day, not a conservative, talking about how rap music is just one giant middle finger to everyone all the time, and how that, of course, will change you as a person, garbage in, garbage out. Also, if you think you're the victim of the man, then you think that you have a moral right, if not even obligation, to take from the man. San Diego, long backstory, but there's a robber. Police found him. He pulled out a gun on the police. Police killed him. This happened just last week. And there was a protest in downtown San Diego about it last week. And one of the protesters said, if this young man was robbing, that means that his state and his government failed to provide him with the resources he needed, right? So you see, he's the victim here, right? And if you feel like you're the victim of the system, of the man, then it's just game on. You can do whatever you want. You can even rob people because nothing's ever your fault. The system's against you. So when Wilfred Riley says that the problem is brothers killing brothers, the response that the left gives is, well, that's just the result of the dynamic created by a racist system with black people being poor, inner city, blah, 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 no opportunities. No, but there's never any personal responsibility from anyone. And I really think that's one of the main root problems of all of this. There's no personal responsibility for anything ever. Theodore Dalrymple, a prison psychologist, he interviews these guys in prison, and they never say, I stabbed him. They always say, the knife went in. You see how passive that is? See, it's not I stabbed him. I didn't do anything. The knife just went in. Dalrymple also wrote about this medical journal in The Lancet about bariatric surgery. And the very first line of it was, more than 500 million adults worldwide now have obesity. They have it. Like it's multiple sclerosis or like COVID, right? They just it came upon them in the night suddenly one day. No personal agency involved whatsoever. And it's like that everywhere. And here's the key line from Dalrymple. He said, it is a mistake to assume that all men want to be free. Now, you want to be free, clearly, so you assume that everyone wants to be free. But that's a mistake, because freedom requires responsibility. And for a lot of people, that's too high of a cost to pay. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. We got Newt Gingrich coming up in just a little bit here. He's got a new book out. We'll talk to him. But I want to slow down in this segment here because this, I think, is super important. James Lindsay. We talked to him on my radio show last week or so, and he's going to be on our special this Friday. He has this new website called newdiscourses.com, and he has an encyclopedia for all the woke speak that you hear today. And the important thing to know is the philosophical foundations for what we're seeing now has been laid for decades, truly decades. It goes back to Marx, but really goes back to the Frankfurt School in the 30s, really ramped up in the 50s and the 60s. The tinder has been laid for decades that we're seeing lit on fire right now. And that's really important to know. So we're gonna spend a lot of time talking about the philosophical underpinnings of what we're seeing today, right? So we can make sense of it and then truly speak against it. Make sense? So I wanna take some time now to talk about cultural Marxism. What does that mean? So let's start with Marxism. So Karl Marx was a philosopher. I think most people think he was like a politician or something. He was a philosopher. Most people only reference him, or we used to reference him with economics. Right? He's the guy, right? From each according to his ability, to each according to his means, about spreading the wealth, right? Big picture though, he viewed the world as a battle between the oppressors, in his case, the rich, because he was about class warfare. So the oppressors, the rich, and the oppressed, the workers. Right? So that was Marx, among other things. It's a broad overview. Cultural Marxism takes those principles and applies it to everything. So this is what these people believe. This is what the far left believes. It's called critical theory, which is the big picture. Critical means to tear down, really. So critical theory, you have critical race theory, critical gender theory, you have all these branches, but critical theory is the big academic umbrella for what all this is. So this is what these critical theory people believe. They believe that Western society, and by the way, if I said this to a critical theorist, they would agree with it. So I'm restating their position as good, if not better, than they can state it themselves. These people believe that Western society is built upon the systematic exploitation and oppression of the oppressed, whoever the oppressed may be, the workers or gay people, black people, whatever, right? Transgendered people. To keep these oppressed people down, we, straight white males, have developed these systems of cultural control. That's the church, different civic groups, schools, mass media, entertainment, the arts, whatever, everything in our system, everything in America, the white man, the white straight male, has created to keep the black man, or whoever else, down. Except for Asians or Indians or black people from the Caribbean nations. But everyone else, we're keeping them down. Because these systems are meant to keep minority people down, everything has to be destroyed so that the oppressed can truly be liberated. That makes sense? That's the game plan here. I want to quote here from Herbert Marcuse. To extend the base of the student movement, Rudi Dutschke had proposed the strategy of the, this is the key word, long march through the institutions, working against the established institutions, the oppressive ones, right, which they all are, working against the established institutions while working within them. But not simply by boring from within, rather by doing the job, learning how to program and read computers, how to teach at all levels of education, how to use the mass media, how to organize production, right? How to design, etc. And at the same time, preserving one's own consciousness in working with others, right? So you still keep your revolutionary Marxist mindset while working in the capitalist game, right? So what is the long march? I just want to be clear here. These leftists have made it their profession to infiltrate the major cultural institutions and upend them from within. And then the cultural institutions will they'll disintegrate without a bang, right? They just go out with a whimper. And you see it. I mean, so just example, Harvard yesterday said that all their entire next year is going to be online, and they're still charging tuition. Similar with Yale, like half the school at Yale's going back and half isn't. Still charging full tuition, $57,000 a year. Yale used to be a bastion of conservatism. I mean, William F. Buckley came out of Yale, right? But Yale used to be a conservative. They all did, and now it's like, right? They've infiltrated all of these places, but it's not just colleges; it's everywhere. Maybe we could talk a little bit about this with Newt coming up in a little bit. He can give us some more examples as well. But they're in everything. So you have either statues being torn down, and that's a metaphor, right? It's true, it's actually happening, and it's a metaphor, right? So you have statues being torn down, and you have authorities doing nothing, standing by doing nothing. Or you have local authorities voting to have the statues taken down. The only statues, again, metaphor here, the only statues being protected are the ones on federal property because of Trump. He's the last dam that is not yet broken. Let me give you an example. Now, we can go in a million different directions here. We're going to go in this direction here. But just know, this is like a pivot point, right? So I feel like I've laid down the foundation for what cultural Marxism is, what their goals are, and now it's example time. Right? We can do a million different examples. This is the one I've chosen today. This is a tweet from James Lindsay. There's a little bit to explain here, but can we put the picture up here so we can kind of make sense of this? All right, so James Lindsay is the guy who made that kind of tan gold picture in the middle. James Lindsay, again, newdiscourses.com. He's the one who's exposing all this. So he's a conservative. He's not really conservative. He's against all this stuff. So he wrote this as a joke. He was mocking the left by saying 2 + 2 = 4. That is a perspective in white Western mathematics that marginalizes other possible values. Okay, so he's mocking this. Hannah Nicole Jones, that's the Ida Bay Wells up there. She's the person behind the 1619 Project, right? Which again is a perfect example. She was indoctrinated in Notre Dame. No, I keep saying Notre Dame whenever I want to say Notre Dame now. Isn't that ridiculous? She was indoctrinated in Notre Dame, went on to go to the New York Times, made the 1619 Project. Now that's a curriculum in our schools. You see how that's infiltrated everything? Okay. So she wrote back, using Arabic numerals to try to make a point about white Western superiority is so darn classic. The person under her, Michael Barani, he wrote, emphatically cosine. Who is he? He is a professor of mathematics at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. His most recent tweet was about decolonizing the history of science and mathematics. Okay, we're decolonizing. What does that mean? It means to disrupt. Remember earlier, the person on MSNBC talked about how we need to disrupt the narrative of Mount Rushmore? Okay, that's what that means. That's their word for destroy, but they don't use the word destroy because that's too harsh. So they infiltrate, they disrupt, and they destroy it from within, right? So that's what they need to do with history of science and mathematics. They need to decolonize it, take the white man out of it. And in cases that we've shared before, even start over with science. So what are they talking about here? Like math, how can you, Western superiority and you're math, how can math be like a woke thing? Okay, this is from the website, newdiscourses.com. Please check this out. They said, by the early 2000s, this epistemological relativism, we'll explain that another day, begins showing up in supplementary resources and non-standard student workbooks in K-12 classrooms throughout the country. I think we have the rest of this quote up here. All right? So this is, okay, there's a book called Rethinking Mathematics. Here we go. Rethinking Mathematics, Teaching Social Justice by the Numbers. That's the book. Calls out traditional math instruction as immoral in a world as unjust as ours. Traditional math is said to be, quote, bad for students and bad for society. Among the immoral and problematic features of traditional math, according to their text, is the curriculum's, quote, fetish for the right answer. And that the right answer is in quotes in the original text here. Math problems with, quote, clear-cut solutions give a false picture of how mathematics can help us read the world. Traditional math, with its fetish for the right answer and obsession with clear-cut solutions, is said to be a, quote, white man's thing. It's instead through dialogue and collective action, not logic and reason, that students should learn math. Students will thereby develop an appreciation for the diverse ways that different cultures understand and perform mathematical tasks. Your head's spinning right now, and I get it. You're thinking, what are you talking about, Slater? This is crazy. This will never take off. You're out of my mind. You're out of your mind. No one will embrace this stuff. I am telling you right now, your kids are already learning this. This is not something, hey, be careful, this could be coming to your kids' school. This is already in your kids' schools. Prove that. This is from the National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics and the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. This is the nation's largest organization of math educators, 80,000 registered members, 200 affiliates, 100 full-time employees. They have an 8-figure annual budget, right? In their 2016 statement, they declared, quote, mathematics teachers and leaders must acknowledge that the current mathematics education system is unjust and grounded in a legacy of institutional discrimination based on race, ethnicity, class, and gender. Instead, their curriculum, the largest curriculum manufacturer, right, aims at infusing leftism into K-12 math instruction and calls for schools to, quote, dismantle inequitable structures, embrace equitable teaching practices, challenge spaces of marginality and privilege. The long march through the institutions, it's taken a few decades, but they've taken over everything. Is there a single cultural force in America that is not controlled by the far left? Even like sports has been taken over. All I can think of, and I'm sure there's more, right? But all I can think of is AM talk radio. But even that's ultimately controlled by giant corporations who eventually are going to cave to all this. And the only other thing I can think of is the first. We are completely independent from everything, right? Truly, this is our future. It's all we have left as we try and march these Marxists back. Newt Gingrich, coming up next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, super honored to talk to our next guest, a man who needs no introduction, former Speaker of the House and author of the new book, Trump and the American Future, Solving the Great Problems of Our Time, the great Newt Gingrich. Speaker Gingrich, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. It's great to be with you.
Good to talk to you. So let's start here. In your lifetime, do you see any precedent to what we're seeing right now in America?
Well, not if you throw in the virus and the government-induced depression, and then you have the radical left going crazy. The combination of all that is more than I've ever seen before. Although the actual activities of the radical left probably aren't quite as bad as they were between 1967 and 1972, when there were 2,500 bombings and the Black Panthers were overtly saying their goal was to kill policemen. So in that sense, pieces of this are different, but have all of them happening simultaneously. It amazes me that President Trump is able to get through the day, because I don't know of any president since Lincoln who's had as many different things simultaneously piled on top of him.
I think about this a lot, where we are on like the severity scale of a country, where 10 is civil war. Like every once in a while, I'm like, everything's going to heck. And then I'm like, oh, well, we did fight a civil war not that long ago, right? So like if that's a 10 on the scale, where do you think we are on just like the freak out as a country?
Well, I think that the left, the anti-American left, has gained strength a great deal since the 60s. And I think that they are a real threat to the survival of our civilization. And I think they're very serious and very sincere. And when you look at, for example, Black Lives Matter, which is a great slogan, but the organization was founded by 3 Marxists who say openly they want to destroy the United States. And all of a sudden, it's not a very good organization, even though it's a great slogan. When you look at the people tearing down the statues, you realize that they're really tearing down America. I mean, when they tear down, for example, Frederick Douglass's statue, the most famous former slave in the middle of the 19th century, This is just pure anti-Americanism. And unfortunately, the news media has now been taken over so much by the hard left that it's essentially, I would say, a propaganda media, not a news media.
We were literally in the last segment, we were just talking about Herbert Marcuse and his talk about the march through the culture, through the institutions.
Right.
Because you just mentioned how the left has more power now than they did back in the 60s. Can you think of any cultural institution in America? You mentioned the media, but can you think of any cultural institution that is not controlled by the far left?
Well, I think that there's still a fight underway with the churches. I think small business is still overwhelmingly traditional American. But part of what happened is you've had 3 generations of brainwashing, starting with Marcuse in the early 1960s at Berkeley. And so really smart people who go to really smart universities get taught really stupid things, but they believe it. Reagan once said, it isn't what our opponents don't know that's frightening, it's what they know that isn't true. And so these people graduate, they now go and they're the executive assistant at Google or Apple or Facebook or or any of these major companies. So they're gradually moving all of the biggest corporations into an insane position. And they become the reporters at the New York Times who insist on firing the editor because out of 7 days of liberalism, he ran 1 article by a conservative senator. And that was such a heresy that he had to be fired. So, I mean, I think you're really seeing a totalitarian left trying very hard to impose itself on the rest of us.
Now, and then 1619 Project wins a Pulitzer Prize, gets into our school curriculum. I think I'm sure you can see how a parent and grandparent feels hopeless. Can you give me some hope? Is there a way out of this?
I don't think we're hopeless. I did a piece for the 4th of July entitled The Land of the Free and the Home of the Brave, which of course is the end of the first verse of the Star Spangled Banner. And my point was, you're not going to remain the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave. So at some point, grandparents and parents have to say, that's crap. I always tell wealthy people, you're giving money to universities to teach your grandchildren to despise you. Why are you doing that? And I think we just have to be honest and blunt and direct. And it's fascinating, for example, that a number of major corporations have decided they won't advertise on Facebook, but they're advertising on Russian media. And you have to think, are these people just nuts? And the answer may be yes.
Do you have a historical anecdote on the top of your head? I know you wrote a book about Valley Forge, talk about hopeless at the time, right? That can give us some of that hope that we can get through this because America's gotten through all of it. We made it through the 60s even. How were we brave?
There are 2 different ways to look at it. The one I think is probably more accurate is Lincoln, who, even when they would win battles, couldn't somehow close the war. And in the summer of 1862, he wrote a note to himself, which ultimately got to be part of his second inaugural, because he'd organized these armies, they were out there fighting, and they somehow just couldn't quite win. And he sort of wrote a note to himself saying, why does God want this war to go on? But he never lost faith in the notion that there was no alternative. And I think that's where Trump at Mount Rushmore was very much in the Lincoln tradition of saying, look, I'm going to stand and fight on these grounds. And he used language that was very strong and that we have to recognize applies to a lot of our neighbors and a lot of people we know who are totalitarians and who are very prepared to tell the rest of us to shut up or they will punish us in some way. The low point, I think, in the creation of America was probably Christmas Day, 1776, and I wrote a book on this, when Washington ended up with an army which had dropped from 30,000 men in September to about 2,500 that were left, a third of whom did not have boots and were marching and with bags wrapped around their feet. And they crossed the river at night during a snowstorm in the ice, marched 8 miles, surprised a Hessian German unit, captured 800 men, which was a big enough victory. They then ran like crazy. He had back across the river before the British Army got there. But the word of that victory built morale. And within a couple of weeks, there were 15,000 volunteers. And they went back across the river again. That was probably the closest we came to losing the Revolutionary War. And so, you know, in Washington's case, he's very similar to Lincoln in that once you go down this road, you don't have any choice. And I think it does take courage. I do podcasts that are free. I also do newsletters. And I've been very direct recently, and I realize that some elements of the left at some point may get really enraged. But that's the price of telling the truth. I mean, you cannot back off from these people if you want to save the country.
It's beautiful. What was that line you had a second ago? I want to sit on that for a second. You said it was about Lincoln. It was like he didn't leave himself the option that there was no way out or something. What was that line? I like that line.
Look, Lincoln knew all the way through the war that he would either persevere or the Union would die. So it was a binary choice. He either had to continue the war as long as it took, or the Union would die. And Lincoln is, who I think is, Washington's our greatest citizen if you count the Revolutionary War, Constitutional Convention, the presidency. Lincoln's our greatest president in that brief 4-year period. What he did was so unbelievable that I always look at it just with a sense of awe that he was able to do it. And it took, for both of them, it took enormous moral courage. And I would argue that what you saw Saturday night in South Dakota was a comparable level of moral courage. I mean, the things that Trump said, which were consistently lied about by the propaganda system, which has replaced the news media, and consistently lied about by Democrats. But the courage for him to go out there and plant a flag and say, you know, we need to tell the truth, we need to be in the fight, and if that's what it's going to take, then we're going to fight, I thought was a remarkably historic speech.
Yeah, it was perfect. The book is Trump and the American Future, Solving the Great Problems of Our Time. Speaker Gingrich, when you talk about solving the problems, do you think the biggest problems are policy, principle, or we'll do another P, philosophy?
Well, I think the biggest problem is philosophy in the sense that you have an education system which has two huge failures. One failure is in big city schools like Baltimore, they don't teach anybody anything, which is a major part of our racial problem in America today, that we cheat poor African Americans and poor Hispanics, but particularly poor African Americans who don't get an education, can't get a job, don't have a very good future, and I don't blame them for being angry. I only wish that they would take it out on their politicians, because when you look at a place like Chicago, where the Democrats have owned the mayor's office since 1931, sooner or later, there ought to be a safety party that emerges that runs against all these failures. I mean, between New York and Chicago, we had 152 people shot this weekend. Now that's astonishing. And it tells you that the Democratic mayor of New York and the Democratic mayor of Chicago have failed. But again, if Trump were to try to go in there, they would go crazy, because the minute the African-American community begins to believe it has an alternative, their entire power structure is going to collapse. And so that's part of it. I would say the biggest institutional problem we have is education. First, because from K through 12, there are huge systems that don't teach anything. There are buildings in Baltimore, the fourth most expensive school system in the country, that have nobody who can pass the state exam, not one.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. The other great problem is that when you get to college and graduate school, you're being taught stuff that's garbage and that's wrong and that's falsehood. But that's what you get an A for. So if you're not willing to write falsehood, you're going to have a hard time getting through an elite college. And so you have these two great education crises coming, and they're going to require really knockdown, drag-out fights.
Yeah, and I think education actually fulfills all three of those Ps, policy, principle, and philosophy. Does any bit of you, Speaker Gingrich, ever in, like, let's say the last 2 years, does any little bit of you want to go back to the House of Representatives and lead?
No. I think what I want to do is help the Republicans in the House, the Senate, and the White House develop a campaign that enables us to define and then defeat the left. I think that's my mission. And that's why I wrote Trump and the American Future. And that's why I do so much media. I think we desperately need to win the intellectual argument about the nature of reality.
Help me as people read the book. This is my last question for you, sir. What's one thing that a regular person like me, who gets frustrated at DC and at Republicans, that you wish we would understand, right? Because all these years, like, why do we still have a Department of Education, right? How many years have Republicans said we got to get rid of the Department of Education? It was still there. So I get frustrated. What do I need to understand, Speaker Gingrich, about how DC functions, that things aren't happening and moving as quickly as maybe we would like them to?
No, I don't think you need to understand anything. I think you ought to be frustrated, and you ought to raise hell with your elected officials, and you ought to run people in primaries. And look, I am for fighting our way through this. I'm not for accepting pablum or nice sweet talk or a little bit of honey on my toast. I want us to defeat the left, reestablish American history, reassert that American exceptionalism is real, and rip out the bureaucracies that are opposed to you and me and every hardworking American.
Let's do it already. Trump and the American Future, Solving the Great Problems of Our Time. It's available right now, audiobook and Kindle as well. Speaker Gingrich, it's an honor, sir. Please keep up your mission.
Thank you. Enjoyed being with you. Thank
Appreciate
you
you
very much.
True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.